So let's start with the afternoon session, and we can begin again with the works. And I'm very pleased to be here. Very thankful to Stefania Gialdroni for the opportunity of being here and listening at all these very, very interesting sessions that have been today. So it is with great pleasure that I introduce now Professor Georges Martyn, that is professor in the University of Ghent. In the University of Ghent, Professor Martyn teaches legal history, legal methodology, and he told me also that in the last year he's teaching a course of law and humanities, or something very close to law and humanities. So, besides being a great expert of early modern private and public law, he is a specialist, as we experienced in RomaTre also. He's a specialist in historical legal iconology. And it is exactly within this field that will take place, I think, his speech of today. And the title is that will be on commercial justice must be seen to be done. Visual aspects of deciding commercial disputes in the Ancien Régime, county of Flanders. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Sara, if I may, it's a big pleasure to see you again, and also a big pleasure to see Emanuele again. And indeed, it reminds me of good days in RomaTre to teach in your course of Law and the Humanities. And meanwhile, I started my own course of Law and Humanities in Gent. And I appreciate enormously the works of Stefania that she has been doing on law and architecture, Corte di Cassazione, and so many other things in the field of law and iconology. And thank you very much, Stefania, for having invited me. What you're doing here with the Justicia people especially is great. It's fantastic. I hope to contribute a little bit, although I have to apologize for the big disillusion. You asked me to speak about visual aspects of commercial dispute resolution in the Ancien Régime Flanders. So if I show you all the images about that, we're done now. I mean, this is a completely different story than the story of iconography in commercial matters in Italy. There are, of course, links and interactions, and I will point at some. But we do not have the rich cultural heritage you have with your loggias de mercantil and that kind of things. So I will take you back to Flanders. First of all, in a nutshell, Flanders is one of the Low Countries. It is originally the most important part of the Low Countries, because actually one of its main cities and its main ports, harbors, was Bruges, and Bruges was the umbilicum mundi of the 12th, 13th century. It was a very important commercial center because of the port of Bruges in the Middle Ages. Until the end of the Middle Ages, at the end of the 15th century, there were, on the one hand, practical problems with the sea going further and further away from Bruges, but actually there was also a political problem with the fact that Bruges, as part of Flanders, was just one of the Low Countries, and that Maximilian had decided that Brabant should be the center of international commerce, and especially the people from Antwerp gave privileges to all the international mercantile nations to actually move from Bruges to Antwerp. And this means actually, at the legal point of view, that they moved from the jurisdiction of the Count of Flanders to the jurisdiction of the Duke of Brabant. And although it's one and the same man, Maximilian, at that moment, and then later on Charles V, for instance, Philip II, although it's the same person as the sovereign of those countries, institutionally, this means that for legal matters, we come in another country, actually, because Brabant, and Antwerp is one of the capital cities of Brabant, Antwerp and Brabant has got some privileges, like being their own sovereign judge. The Council of Brabant does not allow to appeal to a higher court. While here in Bruges, we have a higher court, and that's situated in Gent. I will talk about it in a few moments. But if you do not agree with the Gent decision, with the Flemish decision, you can, from 1473 onwards, you can lodge appeal to the highest court of the Low Countries, which was in Mechelen, Malines. So that's a different jurisdiction, let's say. Flanders is the origin of the Low Countries. There was a big part of Flanders to the western side of the river Scheldt, and that was pertaining feudally to the Kingdom of France, and there was a little part that feudally was part of the Holy Roman Empire on the eastern side of the river Scheldt. So we have a royal Flanders and an imperial Flanders. Flanders is divided, you see the colors here on the screen, is divided up in Châtellenie, Castlereien, regional districts with their own courts also. And the liberty of Bruges is the most important region around Bruges. It has several smaller cities with important privileges as far as merchants, for instance, is concerned. Bruges, the liberty of Bruges, Gent and Ypres are what we call the four members of Flanders. Bruges is originally the most important one because of the port, and still in the 15th century, that's really culturally spoken, also politically spoken, it's the heart of the Low Countries. It's there, for instance, in 1430 that you have the marriage between Philip the Good and Isabel of Portugal, which was one of the biggest festivities in that 15th century. So that was the cultural heart. That was also where, for instance, very rich, also Italian merchants commissioned artworks to our famous, what later were called Flemish primitives, although they were not so primitive at all, but our painters of the 15th century. So it's there that we are going, to that country, to that county, the county of Flanders, with a count seated in the beginning in Bruges, later on in Gent. In Bruges, and here I come to an element of the MICOLL project, in Bruges, we think, at least the Flemish, we think that the words bolsa, borsa, bourse, beurs comes from this place, what you see here on the image. A building that still exists today, and that has been used by the Venetian nation in Bruges, that has been used as a conference center more recently, but that was originally a building of a noble family called family Van der Beurze. And Van der Beurze literally means de la bourse, bourse in the sense of the leather bag where you can put your coins, yes? So that idea of leather bag was the name, and that family was called like that, Van der Beurze. Their heraldic sign was indeed three of those, how you call this, coin holders, trois bourses, that was their sign. And so when, for instance, the Venetian merchants, the Genoese merchants, the Florentines were here on the right-hand side of the image, so they had their guild houses in the neighborhood of that, actually a pub, an inn, a place where people could eat, drink, and could sleep in the beginning. And that man welcomed brokers, welcomed people from foreign nations, and there were too many people inside, so they stood outside, and he started to organize in the 14th century already what became known as de Beurze. We're going to de Beurze, and they actually meant we're going to the house of that family, but what they actually did was going to the exchange place. And the man constructed a little roof, because the weather is not always as good as here in Bruges, so they could stand outside, talk with each other, he started to make rules in cooperation with the city. The bailiff of the city was responsible for public order during the hours of the stock exchange. And it started with the ringing of a bell. And still today we ring the bell, so that dates back to this place in the 14th century. So this is an important place. There must have been also consular justice. Maybe they had iconography to legitimize, to witness their activities as judges, but what has remained of that? To my knowledge, nothing. Nothing in Bruges, but in Gent we have a little bit. Ghent was also an important market place. This is a panoramic view of Ghent in the first half of the 16th century. You still recognize, if you come to Ghent today, you will see our medieval Manhattan here, the three towers, with the belfry as symbol of the government of town, the St. Nicholas Church, and what is called today St. Bevan Cathedral, but at that time was the St. John Church. So that was here, and actually here at the River Scheldt, this is the beginning of Ghent in the 9th century, and it grew and grew, and Ghent, Ganda, is an old word meaning confluence of two rivers, and that's the River Scheldt coming here, and the River Lys coming from the other side, and they come together here. And this has become a very important port. Our port is now more in the direction of Holland today, but in the Middle Ages you had the first port here, the second port there, and then the third port or harbour there. So Ghent became the political capital of Flanders because the Count had his castle there. For instance, Charles V was born in Ghent, not by coincidence. And in that castle, from 1384 onwards, we had the Supreme Court of Flanders and the Council of Flanders. The Council of Flanders was responsible for the privilegium fori of the foreign merchants. So we do have preserved in the Ghent archives court files. I never looked at one from Italian cities, but there were several court cases with the Portuguese nation, for instance, from the 15th century, because they appealed to a decision in Bruges to the Court of Appeal, the Council of Flanders in Ghent. So it was a political and judicial capital. It was a religious heart of Flanders because there were two abbeys there. Here you see one abbey, St. Bevan, and there is the other abbey, where is the other abbey? There, St. Peter. And St. Peter and St. Bevan were not only religious institutions. For instance, the counts had their burial place in St. Peter's, but also they were the owners of many plots of land all over Flanders. So they were also seniors in judicial and territorial meaning. Ghent became a commercial center of being that confluence of two rivers, and the big roads going to Bruges, going to Lille, and then further on to Paris, going to Cologne, it all crossed in Ghent. So we had markets. The most important marketplace is over there, that's the Friday market. It's since the 12th century we have every week there the Friday market, but Ghent is also a center of the textile industry in the Middle Ages, and you see it a little bit here in this 16th century painting. What you see here, all those white sheets are actually blankets. It's the linen, it's the clothes that are bleakening in the sun. So in this spot, we have many merchants, but not in the sense that there are nations of merchants. There were in the 15th century, 13th, 14th, 15th century, in Bruges nations, but those nations moved at the end of the 15th century to Antwerp. The nation that survived most in Antwerp until the end of the Ancien Régime was the Portuguese nation as the only one. The other nations simply died because in 1585 Antwerp is lost by the rebellious Dutch Protestants against Philip II. It becomes Catholic again after 1585 and the closure of the Scheldt. industry and commerce tumbles down, and especially after the Westphalian Treaty, 1684, Antwerp is not that important anymore. Gent is still less important, and is a dying city, more or less, and it tries to recover in the 18th century. Now, there were, of course, merchants in the county of Flanders, and to search for, let's say, a link between merchants and the iconography of justice, I have three elements to say about that. First of all, there were many merchants who paid a lot of money for big works of art on justice. Yeah? But this doesn't mean that it has anything to do with justice administration as we know it today. It's, in the first place, justice as the regina virtutum, as the queen of virtues, the most important virtue. Like the painting you see here by Gabriel Metsu, it could have been, and it was thought at the beginning, that this was an altarpiece. It's 1.5 meters high, 1.20 broad. It represents Lady Justice. We can see the scales, we can see the sword. There's a man that is gonna die probably under the sword of justice. So this might have been a work of art commissioned by court, maybe. No, not at all. It was commissioned by Michiel van Peene, and he was a merchant of wool, an international wool merchant. So why did he then have Lady Justice painted? Well, the rest of the painting explains it, actually, why he had this painting. Because he wanted to be a just man. He wanted to be correct in his handling as a merchant. They are very often criticized as not reliable people, so I am reliable. I put a beautiful painting of Lady Justice, and this shows that in my case, violence cannot survive. And you see the man who is lying as a victim at the bottom has a dagger, but he can't do anything anymore. And there are coins. With money, you can't buy heaven. No? Money is not okay to corrupt judges, for instance. No, this man, Michiel van Peene, the wool merchant, is an honest man. And he tries to use his money for useful things and to make society better. And one of the things he did was he was a member of the board of the Care for the Poor in the city of Amsterdam. And one of the things they did with the board of governors for the poor was having schools, organizing schools for orphans. And those orphans were dressed in red, white, and black, because those are the colors of the city of Amsterdam. And you see a little boy on the right-hand side praying there and actually thanking Lady Justice and thanking Michiel van Peene for the money he has given to the school of the orphans. So you see here that this has nothing to do with justice. Michiel van Peene was not a jurist. Michiel van Peene was even not a consular judge, a commercial judge. He did use also the emblem of the scales. The scale is not only in the hands here of Lady Justice, you can also see the scales here on the bottom. Here's a box with scales in it. And not only scales, also weights. And those were the weights that were used for the coins. And I will come back to that in a few moments, because seeing scales might be a reference to justice, but might also be a reference to commerce. So that it's common symbol. Here a painting from the 15th century by Memling, a triptych that is now, unfortunately, in Gdansk, the Last Judgment by Memling, but it was ordered by the people you see on the left-hand side, upper right side, Angelo di Giacomo and Caterina de Fanaghi. They were in Bruges for their commerce, for as bankers. And they commissioned, with one of the most important painters of that time, Hans Memling, this beautiful triptych on the Last Judgment. At that very moment, many courts in Flanders ordered, with the same artists, the same representation. So again, this could have been a representation of the Last Judgment to be put in an audience room for a courtroom, but no, this was private again. It was for the private virtue, and those two people wanted to go to heaven finally. So this was meant to be in their funerary chapel in Italy. Only when the boat left, it was pirated by Easterlingers, and the painting was brought to Gdansk, where it is still today. So that justice as a personal virtue should not lead us to the conclusion that what we see is very often related to justice administration and to courts. That justice comes from Christian iconography, and actually in the painting, for instance, here, we already see the balance in the hands of Saint Michael and the sword in the hands of Saint Michael, and that will become the classical symbols of Lady Justice, but Lady Justice is a construction of Renaissance. And you can't find, I think, the earliest representation of Lady Justice with scales and sword, without the blindfold, and that's another story, but scales and sword. The funerary tomb of Pope Clement II in Bamberg is the oldest representation, and it's already 12th century. So it's only from then onwards that you have the idea of justice as a virtue is represented with scales and sword. Many people say it's a reference to Themis, it's a reference to a Roman goddess Justitia. It is not. Like the scales, for instance, in Roman times, that was Aequitas and not Justitia. But the idea of weighing is, of course, important for commerce also. And so we see it appear, for instance, we see appear Saint Michael, and afterwards Lady Justice. They appear on top of scales that are used. Here we see a pharmacy scale, for instance. Here another balance, and you see that here are the weights to weigh the coins, or for the pharmacist to weigh the herbs, etc. But especially for weighing the coins, that was the reference in the painting of Michiel van Peenen. He changes coins, he works with coins all day, and the coins should be correct, so he can put them in the scales. And then you see that the boxes of those scales have, in this case, a Lady Justice. So Lady Justice is here as a reference to a virtue again, to use your weights in a good way. It has actually nothing to do with justice administration. Okay, unfortunately. So I'm going to look further if I have other examples where the scales and the balance might appear as the symbol of justice, or maybe the caduceus, because that is an element of Mercury, and that is already from 16th century onwards represented in many artworks as a reference to commerce, thanks to the god Mercury. And indeed, I find one here on the left-hand side. Yes, there you see a caduceus, and you might think, here we are. There is commerce, unfortunately not in this case again, because it literally says what it stands for. Pacemaker is written next to it. And if we look further at this painting, you see here people who are angry, yes, and then people who ask for forgiveness, and they kneel in front of the law, and it's all classical representations of the law in the two tablets of the law of Moses, and then that caduceus stands here simply for peace. And indeed, who commissioned this artwork? Not a merchant, but a jurist, a councillor of the Council of Flanders, seated in the castle of Gent. So he also ordered a religious work to represent that idea of I am a correct judge, I am a good judge, I'm a pacemaker, I'm a peacemaker. Yeah? And we see a lot of references to justice administration, but it's again as a virtue. Here in the background you see what that man probably has actually ordered to be done. People are decapitated and hung, etc. So maybe that's the action of the law at that time, but that man commands that painting for his funerary chapel in order to have eternal life and to be reminded as a correct judge. So if we see sometimes Lady Justice, And even if we see the Cariceus, it is not a reference to commercial justice administration, unfortunately. Okay, but then the second possibility, anyhow, justice is also what the government, what the city government, what the count himself is striving for. It is the bonum commune, going to the wealth of everyone thanks to justice. For instance, if the laws of Flanders are printed on the frontispiece or the title page of the big series of all the legislation, all the statutes and ordinances of the Count of Flanders, we see indeed again Lady Justice. So here we're nearer to law already. It's a political objective. And that political objective of we are under the image of Lady Justice. We are good administrators. We are good judges. Is represented in every courtroom that is made in the County of Flanders from the 15th century onwards, because before the 15th century they sat in judgment in the open. Then they move to the church porches, and very often in the church porch they are under the representation of the last judgment. But when they become wealthy enough to construct their own stone-built town hall, they will decorate that town hall with that same image. Not Lady Justice, she has not arrived yet, but how are we going to represent the good justice? By the last judgment. And sometimes it is said literally in the frame around the painting, for instance, remember, you judges, that one day you will be judged yourself, the last judgment. And here, this one was painted in 1413 already for the Council of Flanders, so for the Court of Appeal in the Count's Castle in Gent. We see not only a classical representation, just like we see it in the churches, but we see also next to Christ in his red robe, and in the Apocalypse it is said that's a red robe because it is drenched in the blood of the condemned, and that's where the red as the color of justice comes from. So they're going to paint also the doors of the churches where they sit in judgment. They're going to paint them red because that is the place of justice. And not only that, we see here 12 like disciples of Christ, of course, and the apostles, but these 12 are a symbol. And when the French come and conquer our region, they demolish many of our churches, but also they demolish many artworks in our civil buildings. And they say, we don't need that reference anymore to that last judgment, for instance. And they install the popular justice with the jury. And that jury has 12 members, and that's actually that same symbolism that continues. But I'm far away from the merchants now. The political idea of we are a just city is shown by the city of Gent, for instance, on its city gates. And we're not the only city to do that. In many cities, when you enter the city, you actually go in under Lady Justice. And she's here on the left-hand side, you see the lion, and the lion stands for the force of the city, and on the right-hand side, you see Lady Justice with her sword and scales. That representation of the last judgment is, for instance, made for the main judges of the town of Gent, who also deal with disputes among merchants. So merchants will have appeared in the courtroom where this painting has hung. These are the aldermen of the charter, they are called, aldermen of de Keulen in Dutch. You see the classical representation, but here you see especially Italian influence. The man who has painted this, Raphael Coxi, is called Raphael because his father was already a painter, Michel Coxi, and he sent his son to Italy to study the Italian examples. So that commerce and that traveling was also important for the mutual influence on the representation. There has been a court case going over this painting because Raphael Coxi was asked to come to Gent, to be in Gent for a year to paint that painting, and it took longer than the alderman had foreseen, and he asked each time another account, give me more money, and they said, this is going to cost too much. And they brought the case to the Council of Flanders, and it took a few years to be decided. They asked Antwerp painters to come as some kind of experts to evaluate this painting. So it took some time to make this painting, and that is maybe why on the right-hand corner, if you have a last judgment, the left side are the people who will go to heaven, on the right-hand side, the people who go to hell. Of course, it's the other way around, because you have to see it from the side of Christ. On his right-hand side are the good people, and on his left-hand side are the wrong people. Now, the wrong man going to hell on the right-hand side, he has taken with him a procedural bag. And that procedural bag refers to the fact that, okay, in the first place, lawyers, you should not trust them. And we had a real dispute in court going on this representation. Now, this was a classical representation in the 15th, in the 16th, and the 17th, and in the 18th century. In all the courtrooms, you had the last judgment, just like you had the crucifixion, and crucified Christ in every courtroom. But then you have a second generation of other biblical representations of good justice, Solomon's wisdom, the Charts Susanna. Then you have the third generation with references to mythology, like Sisamnes and the Justice of Cambyses. And then in the 17th century arrived the allegories. And I was so happy to find finally an allegory where we see both together. Justice and with her sword and scales. And then you see over there Mercury. Mercury finally arrives in Flemish iconography. Why so late? Because Flemish painting in the 16th, 17th century is not so important anymore. It's more in Brabant and in Antwerp that it happens. And why then this painting in the 18th century? That is because only in the 18th century will be established chambers of commerce. Like in Bruges already 1665, but in Gent in 1729. So at that moment, those chambers, they're going to meet in a certain place, first in inns again, in pubs, but then they construct their own house. And this is the house of the Chamber of Commerce on one of the main markets in Gent. On top, you see the lion of the city again, and it was in this house that, for instance, the official weights were kept. So again, the image of the balance is repeated here in the decoration. And inside, they needed a huge painting to show that Gent is an international commercial center. Actually, there was not that much anymore at that time, but they asked Pieter van Rijschoot, a local painter, to make this painting with Neptune, a reference to the harbor and the sea. You see the boats in the background. And then in the middle, you see the Virgin of Gent with her lion. You see Mercury. But then the other ladies, you see, are actually references to, you see, 4 persons. And these 4 persons are references to the 4 continents at that moment. And that was also an iconography that had an antecessor in Gent. Because there was not only the alderman of the charter, there was a second bench of aldermen, the alderman of partition, of the Dele. And they ordered this painting, and I could talk 2 hours about this painting alone, but just to show you again, influence of Italy, for instance. In Rome, you have a representation of the river Tevere. Here we have a copy, but this is the river Scheldt with the cornucopia. River Scheldt comes together with the river Lys, the younger lady. So this is the confluence of Gent. Thanks to that confluence, the cornucopia, we become rich and wealthy, and people from all over the world come. We see a black man and a red man, and so the 4 continents are represented again there. And the judges who are responsible for justice administration are represented not with portraits, because there were 13 judges and we only see 8. Why 8? Because they're all a symbol for the ideal justice administration. They are justice, one of the cardinal virtues and the queen of the cardinal virtues. The other virtues are there too. Here you see force with her pillar. There you see prudence, and she's actually a court clerk. here, yeah? And there you see temperance pouring water and wine in the same tassa. But then you will think maybe Justice is that the president of the court. No, she's not. That's the Virgin of Gent with her lion. And where is justice then? Well, the aldermen themselves are justice. You see one man blindfolded, the third one there. You see the one next to him has got the sword, and on the other side you see one with scales. And then who are the other people? On the left-hand side, the old man with the beard, the old experienced man, reference to customary law. By experience, you know what the law is. The second one, the young man with the book. He went to university and he knows what the learned law is. Then you have the blindfolded man, reference to Lady Justice. The sword on the other side, a blind man. And the third one is sitting like this. And that's a reference to a story that has become popular in the 16th century by Erasmus. And it's a reference to the judges of Thebes, of whom it was said that they had no hands and no eyes, so that they could not see who was the rich party, and that they could not accept presents from the parties. And then finally, on the right-hand side, you see a man saying like this, and be quiet in court. And it's also the secrecy of the court deliberation. Now, this painting has a reference to commerce, but it was not used in the commercial court. It was used in the alderman's court. And the nations, for instance, have the privilege to decide within their own consulate, their own cases. Just like the guilds, as lower courts, could also decide smaller cases themselves. And if you did not agree, you could appeal to the alderman. Now there is one painting, because I'm going off time? No?
No.
I have still time.
No, please.
Yes, well, there is one painting I wanted to show you, certainly, because this is really made for a commercial court. Finally, I found a painting made for a commercial court. For the court that was called the Vinders. And the Vinders, literally, that means the people who find something, the finders. And it comes from our word rechtsvinding, is how to find the legal solution. So it's court decision, actually. The Vinders, and another word was halheren. Halheren means the gentleman of the hall, and it was the cloth hall. So the cloth hall where the national and international commerce of clothes took place in the center of town. Now these local, this local, it was called a subalterne wet, subaltern, lower court. This lower court had the summary proceedings. First of all, no use to use a lawyer or a proctor for proceedings for these lower courts. And this painting was made by a local painter, not a really famous painter in Flanders, but they asked him explicitly to make a very didactical painting. And it is a didactical painting. You should learn from this painting, and I want to tell you why. What do you see actually? It's a little bit inspired by the Last Judgment. You know, in the Last Judgment, that's the bad side, and this is the good side. So on the good side, you see the president of the court with his red cape, referring to the idea of justice. And here are the court clerk, or the registered secretary, and the clerks who help him. And one is saying, it's really stinking here. And why does it stink in the courtroom? Because it's sulfur, it's Lucifer, it's the devil himself who has come in. And there you see on the right-hand side, the devil who is taking a man. And the name of the painting says what it is, the punishment of the perjurer. So what is here actually the purpose of this painting? This painting was put on the wall exactly on the place where someone who had to take an oath had to kneel in front of the painting to take the oath. And taking the oath means raising your hand with 3 fingers. You can see it there. And that's a reference to Trinity. Yeah? It's God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. So you make connection with God, and you actually say, my soul may go to hell if I'm lying. Well, that is actually what is happening here. So you could say in the oath you swear, and we had it in our own code until 1967, I will say the truth and only the truth, so help me God. We threw away God in 1967, but we still use our hand in one sense or another. Yeah? If you go to court and you see people swearing an oath, some will raise their whole hand, others one finger, others two fingers. We don't know anymore where it stands for, but it's Trinity, and it's actually a very religious background of the oath taking. And here you see literally, and I think this inspires much more than the black letter law, so help me God, yes. But if I see the image of, if I will not tell the truth, I will be taken by the devil himself and I will end up in hell. It's much more frightening, and it's really a message that is taking over. And this exemplary function is essential for every court decoration. The decoration by the last judgment, it's the exemplary function. You will be judged yourself. Solomon's wisdom, the Charles Susanna, they're all actually examples we should live up to. Well, here also, what you see is an example to follow. So that's the serious part, let's say. And I want to add as final painting another coming together of merchants and jurists, also from our Gent collection of the Museum of History of Town. And it's our Gent version of the Toten dance. Many cities have a dance, danse macabre. And it's about whoever you are, at the end, we will all die. Yes? But what is interesting here, this is a harsh critique on the jurists. Because you have on the left-hand side, first, of course, the Pope and the Emperor, then you have the nobleman, then you have the counselor of government, the one who gives advice to the Pope and the nobles, yes. Then you have the simple man who works hard for his money and who grows vegetables and meat, and thanks to him we can eat. And then you have the merchant, and below it says, I become rich thanks to all those in front of me. So the merchant is criticized because of his richness. But the final one, before the skeleton and death himself, is the jurist. And the jurist is there with his procedural bag, and with his ink and pen pals, yes? And that is how very often jurists are represented. They have a lot of documents, it costs a lot of money. Someone referred yesterday to the fact when you have to fill out a form or write a paper, at least it should be short margins, and you should put, there are rules in Gent of the Council of Flanders, you should put at least so many words on the line and so many lines on the page, so that reference of it costs too much money, it takes too much time, and so whatever all the other people do, and they may become rich like the merchant, the jurist finally eats it all and kills them all, and will be the last man standing before death takes us all. This is another way in which it was represented as a jurist, and with my pen. I don't care if it's justice or injustice. Do you see the lines over there? They say, I don't care if it's just or unjust, if I can, with my pen, chase the fat pig in the copper kettle so that I can eat well. I wish you all you were not such jurists. Thank you for your attention.
So, thank you. So, Belem Fernández Castro is worked as researcher actually on different European projects, including the ERC project Mediterranean Reconfigurations. And in 2022 she joined the Scuola Superiore Meridionale in Napoli, as a researcher in the area of global history, and she currently works within the project Justicia Mercatoria, coordinated by Stefania Gialdroni. I hadn't said at the beginning of the session that actually we got inside the Justicia Mercatoria side of the meeting that we've done with the paper, the introductory paper of Professor Martyn. So now we will go on with Anna Belem Fernández Castro, and the title of her paper, hopefully good pronounced, Poderes, conectados, corona y élites mercantiles en la construcción de los lugares de la justicia mercantil en la España moderna. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, I have to thank you all for being here despite the conditions, the weather conditions. I profit to deeply thank Stefania for trusting me with this, with not only with this paper, but also with the responsibility of preparing a PhD dissertation. I feel honored, and I honestly tell you all that I hope really to be to fulfill her expectations. And now I have a bad news for you, or for good news, I don't know. I moved to multilingualism, so I'm gonna speak in Spanish. But I promise I'm not going to be fast. Matthias is not here anymore, I don't see her. And he explained that we Spaniards used to speak really fast. But I make you a promise, I'm going to be really slow, I'll try to be super clear. Entonces, en el ámbito mercantil hispánico de la temprana edad moderna, la administración de justicia se desarrollaba en escenarios muy diversos, tanto públicos como privados, reflejo de la pluralidad de jurisdicciones que nutrieron la cultura jurídico-mercantil del periodo. El arbitraje constituye un ejemplo particularmente ilustrativo, especialmente si consideramos que tuvo una relevancia o tiene una relevancia historiográfica al por qué se le ha atribuido una posición privilegiada como instrumento de resolución de controversias comerciales. De acuerdo con las fuentes judiciales y notariales, numerosos arbitrajes tuvieron lugar en plazas públicas como esta. Aquí podemos ver, es una fotografía de mediados del siglo XIX que muestra la Plaza del Triunfo de Sevilla, donde convergen la catedral y la lonja que actualmente es el Archivo General de Indias. En ella todavía pueden apreciarse las gradas que rodeaban el templo, un espacio utilizado habitualmente por los mercaderes para cerrar sus negocios y resolver sus conflictos. En ocasiones, las negociaciones llegaban incluso al interior de la catedral, especialmente cuando las condiciones meteorológicas eran adversas. Esta práctica provocó las continuas quejas del arzobispo de Sevilla, quien consideraba que los mercaderes atentaban contra la sacralidad del lugar al introducir en él la vileza de sus negocios. La situación llegó a tal extremo que amenazó con excomulgar a quienes persistieran en tales comportamientos. Quizás atraídos por la solemnidad del espacio y por la posibilidad de disponer de un recinto relativamente reservado en el corazón de la ciudad, los miembros de las comunidades mercantiles extranjeras asentadas en territorio hispánico podían resolver sus diferencias en las capillas que sus respectivas naciones habían fundado en iglesias y conventos locales. Estos espacios no solo cumplían funciones devocionales, sino que también actuaban como lugares de encuentro, negociación y administración de justicia dentro de la propia comunidad. El caso del convento de San Francisco, que podemos ver en la imagen, es sumamente ilustrativo. Aunque el edificio no se conserva, la documentación confirma que albergaba las capillas de las naciones portuguesa, francesa, vasca y burgalesa. En ellas, las respectivas comunidades desarrollaban actividades tanto piadosas como jurisdiccionales, convirtiendo el espacio religioso en un escenario privilegiado para la resolución de conflictos mercantiles. En otras ocasiones, la naturaleza del conflicto exigía un entorno más íntimo, en el que las partes pudieran negociar sus pretensiones. De hecho, la mayoría de los arbitrajes examinados en las Cortes tuvieron lugar en casas particulares de alguno de los litigantes o de los propios árbitros. Del mismo modo, las oficinas de notarios constituyeron otro escenario habitual para la administración de justicia, ya que los escribanos públicos eran frecuentemente requeridos como árbitros. Pero el arbitraje también formaba parte de la práctica cotidiana de los tribunales civiles hispánicos. La imagen representa la estructura de la audiencia de la Chancillería de Valladolid, uno de los tribunales reales más importantes y la génesis de la audiencia castellana como modelo jurisdiccional. En las audiencias, los magistrados debían procurar la reconciliación entre las partes antes de iniciar un litigio formal. El protocolo era esencialmente el mismo en los territorios de la Corona de Aragón, cuyos jueces intentaban conciliar a los litigantes ofreciendo la alternativa arbitral como vía preferente de resolución de conflictos. También en los consulados, considerados la jurisdicción mercantil hispánica por excelencia, los cónsules proponían el arbitraje antes de iniciar un proceso judicial formal. Los principales enclaves comerciales de la monarquía hispánica contaron con consulados, siendo la Corona de Aragón pionera en la implantación de este modelo institucional. El más antiguo fue el Consulado del Mar de Valencia, fundado en 1283. En Castilla, por el contrario, las instituciones consulares tuvieron un desarrollo más tardío. El primero fue el Consulado de Burgos, fundado en 1494, siguiendo el modelo mediterráneo, al que posteriormente se sumó el de Bilbao en 1511 y Sevilla, que también contó con un consulado, aunque no fue instituido sino hasta 1543. La presencia de la Casa de la Contratación, creada en 1503 y dotada desde sus orígenes de competencias jurisdiccionales, incluso en materia mercantil, retrasó la necesidad de formalizar una jurisdicción especializada para los comerciantes de la carrera de Indias. Como puede apreciarse en el mapa, con el tiempo fueron surgiendo numerosos consulados tanto en la península como en las Indias, hasta su supresión definitiva en 1829 con la promulgación del primer Código de Comercio. La diversidad de escenarios que acabamos de recorrer plantea una pregunta importante. Si la justicia mercantil podía administrarse en tantos lugares distintos, ¿por qué algunas comunidades mercantiles decidieron invertir enormes recursos en la construcción de edificios específicamente destinados a la administración de justicia? La cuestión resulta especialmente evidente en el ámbito mediterráneo, donde contamos con magníficos ejemplos de arquitectura mercantil, como los que podremos ver ahora. Aquí tenemos a la lonja de Perpiñán, que como ciudad principal del Rosellón pertenecía en la temprana época moderna a la Corona de Aragón. Aquí tenemos una foto de la lonja de Mallorca, la lonja de Castellón, y la famosa sala de contratación del Consulado del Mar de Barcelona, que hoy en día es la sede de matrimonios. Así que si alguien tiene interés por organizar un evento privado, es posible. Por el momento, yo me concentraré en los casos de Valencia y de Sevilla, que son los casos de estudio que desarrollaré en la tesis doctoral. Un elemento esencial para comprender las razones que motivaron la creación de estos espacios de comercio y justicia es su estrecha vinculación a la figura del monarca y, por extensión, a la cultura política de la época. Esta conexión tuvo consecuencias decisivas tanto en la naturaleza de la justicia administrada por los consulados como en la materialidad de los edificios destinados a albergar. Los consulados de Valencia y Sevilla nacieron como privilegios reales, con una finalidad esencialmente jurisdiccional. No surgieron como tribunales puramente corporativos, sino como jurisdicciones del rey, en la que los mercaderes gozaban del privilegio de una justicia breve e informal orientada a resolver los conflictos conforme a la verdad de los hechos y a la buena fe entre mercaderes. Como consecuencia, ambas instituciones permanecieron estrechamente vinculadas a la justicia regia y, por extensión, al derecho civil. En el caso valenciano, los procesos del Consulado del Mar seguían el mismo sistema de apelaciones que los tribunales ordinarios, correspondiendo incluso a la magistratura urbana de justicia civil el nombramiento de algunos de los jueces encargados de revisar las sentencias. Además, tanto los cónsules como los litigantes podían solicitar la intervención de letrados asesores que contribuyeran a la resolución de los pleitos. Algo parecido ocurría en Sevilla. Allí, la Casa de la Contratación actuaba como tribunal de apelación de las sentencias pronunciadas por el consulado. A ello se suma el hecho de que las decisiones de los cónsules solían elaborarse con el auxilio de juristas y, en ocasiones, eran íntegramente elaboradas por ellos. Pero como hemos anticipado, el hecho de ser de jurisdicciones reales no solo condicionó la manera en que se administraba justicia, sino que también influyó decisivamente en la materialidad de los espacios destinados al verano. Si bien el Consulado de Sevilla fue fundado en 1543, tuvo que esperar hasta 1572 para que Felipe II autorizara la construcción de la lonja, a pesar de las precarias condiciones en las que los cónsules desempeñaban sus funciones en la sede de la Casa de la Contratación. Aunque Felipe II solicitó a los mercaderes sevillanos la presentación de un proyecto que satisficiera las necesidades de los comerciantes, finalmente impuso el diseño elaborado por Juan de Herrera, que es quien fuera el arquitecto responsable del monasterio del Escorial. El proyecto herreriano constituye en realidad una auténtica declaración de intenciones por parte de la monarquía. A través de un edificio monumental, sobrio y ordenado, Felipe II pretendía celebrar el éxito de la política imperial y dignificar una actividad, el comercio, que proporcionaba buena parte de los recursos necesarios para sostenerla. Sin embargo, el rey se limitó a autorizar la obra y determinar su diseño. Fueron los propios mercaderes de la carrera de Indias quienes debieron financiar íntegramente el edificio a través de la imposición de un impuesto conocido como derecho de lonja. Como era de esperar, esta circunstancia generó importantes tensiones. Los comerciantes estaban sufragando un edificio extraordinariamente costoso sobre cuyo aspecto apenas podían intervenir. Las negociaciones entre ambas partes resultan incluso divertidas, pues revelan el contraste entre la preocupación de la corona por legitimar su autoridad a través del refinamiento artístico y el pragmatismo de los mercaderes, a quienes la arquitectura interesaba fundamentalmente en términos de utilidad económica. Los cónsules llegaron incluso a criticar la excesiva ambición del proyecto de Herrera, argumentando que no era necesario acometer una obra tan heroica. Entre las alternativas propuestas figuraba la construcción de pequeñas edificaciones anexas que pudieran alquilarse y de ese modo generar ingresos adicionales. Afortunadamente para el patrimonio sevillano, tanto Herrera como el monarca se opusieron y esa idea de los cónsules no prosperó. Tuve una idea que me parece simpática y le pedí a la inteligencia artificial que me dijera cómo habría podido ser esta situación. Entonces, en las fuentes es clara la rabia del arquitecto Herrera ante la sugerencia de los cónsules de construir casas que obviamente no tenían nada que ver y vulneraban la dignidad de este palacio de justicia. Menos mal que ocurrió así. Lo cierto es que, a pesar de los esfuerzos realizados para dignificar el comercio mediante una arquitectura monumental, tanto los cónsules como los mercaderes tardaron mucho en apropiarse realmente del nuevo edificio. Los primeros continuaron utilizando las instalaciones de la Casa de la Contratación, mientras que los segundos siguieron reuniéndose en las gradas de la catedral. La lonja, de hecho, solo era utilizada cuando el clima era adverso, cuando hacía mucho frío o cuando hacía mucho calor. Y entonces la contratación al aire libre no era factible. Los debates suscitados en torno a la construcción de la lonja revelan además el escaso interés del colectivo mercantil sevillano por construir una identidad pública basada en el prestigio artístico o arquitectónico. Esta actitud resulta especialmente llamativa si tenemos en cuenta el contexto cultural castellano, donde la actividad comercial se encontraba frecuentemente asociada a la sospecha moral de la visita. Es posible que los esfuerzos de los mercaderes se orientaran más a la construcción de reputaciones individuales que hacia la afirmación de una identidad corporativa. La acumulación de riqueza, la adquisición de títulos nobiliarios y el cultivo del honor personal parecen haber desempeñado un papel mucho más importante en las estrategias de legitimación social del colectivo mercantil sevillano. No es casual en este sentido, y encajando aquí con el proyecto MICOLL, que el término crédito en español tuviera un doble significado. Aludía tanto a la disponibilidad de dinero, de recursos económicos, pero también a la reputación personal, al estar en posibilidad de pagar tus deudas. El caso valenciano presenta una dinámica diferente a la observada en Sevilla. Aunque el Consulado del Mar también constituía una jurisdicción real, la construcción de la lonja respondió principalmente a la iniciativa de la propia ciudad, que estaba interesada en reforzar su posición como uno de los principales centros comerciales del Mediterráneo occidental. La lonja nueva no surgió como una expresión identitaria de la clase mercantil valenciana, sino como parte de una estrategia urbana más amplia destinada a consolidar la vocación comercial de la ciudad. Su construcción respondió a la necesidad de dotar a Valencia de infraestructuras capaces de atraer y acoger transacciones comerciales y financieras de alcance internacional. La decisión del Consejo Municipal de emprender esta ambiciosa obra en torno al 1483 no fue casual. Coincidió con una serie de acontecimientos que amenazaban el equilibrio económico del reino. La toma de Otranto por los turcos en 1480 puso en peligro las posesiones aragonesas en Italia y comprometía el suministro de trigo siciliano del que Valencia dependía enormemente. Al mismo tiempo, la progresiva apertura de las rutas atlánticas comenzó a desviar el interés de los comerciantes e inversores hacia otros escenarios económicos, relegando paulatinamente a Valencia a una posición secundaria dentro de las redes comerciales europeas. Fue en este contexto cuando las autoridades municipales decidieron promover la construcción de una nueva lonja que, según expresan las propias fuentes, debía ser bella, magnífica y suntuosa, una obra que honrara la ciudad, la embelleciera y, sobre todo, atrajera a mercaderes locales y extranjeros para que desarrollaran en ella sus actividades, beneficiando también al fisco. La monumentalidad del edificio obedecía, por tanto, a una lógica que trascendía lo puramente económico. La lonja no solo aspiraba a facilitar la contratación mercantil, pretendía también proyectar una determinada imagen de la ciudad de Valencia como una ciudad abierta al comercio, próspera y plenamente integrada en los circuitos comerciales internacionales. El edificio respondía igualmente a una función social. Proporcionaba a los mercaderes un espacio cómodo, protegido y prestigioso para desarrollar sus negocios, contribuyendo simultáneamente al embellecimiento urbano y a la dignificación de la actividad comercial. En este sentido, la lonja valenciana constituía un espacio profundamente multifuncional. Además de servir como lugar de encuentro para los comerciantes, acogía instituciones fundamentales para el funcionamiento económico y político de la ciudad. En primer lugar, el Consulado del Mar, la tabla de cambios, que era el banco municipal, y distintas oficinas encargadas de la administración fiscal. La presencia de estas instituciones pone de manifiesto que la arquitectura mercantil no puede interpretarse únicamente como una infraestructura económica. Se trataba más bien de espacios en los que convergían distintas formas de autoridad y en los que se articulaban funciones comerciales, jurisdiccionales y gubernativas. A diferencia de Sevilla, donde la construcción de la lonja estuvo estrechamente ligada a la voluntad de la monarquía de proyectar una imagen acorde con la grandeza de la empresa imperial, en Valencia fue la propia ciudad la que impulsó la creación de un edificio capaz de atraer mercaderes y revitalizar la economía urbana. Sin embargo, esta diferencia no debe ocultar un elemento común en ambos casos. Tanto en Sevilla como en Valencia, la creación de espacios permanentes para el comercio y la administración de justicia fue el resultado de la colaboración entre distintos actores políticos y económicos. Ni la corona ni las élites mercantiles actuaron de manera aislada. La configuración de estos edificios respondió, por el contrario, a procesos de negociación en los que intervinieron intereses diversos y en ocasiones contrapuestos. Precisamente por ello, las lonjas constituyen observatorios privilegiados para comprender la manera en que se entrelazaron las distintas formas de poder que caracterizaron a las sociedades de antiguo régimen. Y con esto termino. Muchas gracias por su atención.
Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you very much to Anna Belem Fernández Castro, also for being perfectly in the times. And now we'll move to the final paper of the session of Chiara Lo Giudice. And Chiara Lo Giudice has been a postdoctoral researcher, has done her studies in Padova. She's been a postdoc in the Department of Beni Culturali, of Cultural Heritage, at the University of Padua. And within this project, she studied the frescoes of Giambattista and Gian Domenico Tiepolo. And as Fernández Castro, she is currently researcher at the University of Padua within the project Justitia, directed by Stefania. So, Chiara Lo Giudice, the title of her paper will be L'Audienza del Municipio di Lubecca, and she will speak in Italian. Fine, thank you very much. Chiara.
Grazie mille, ringrazio prima di tutto voi che siete qui e Stefania che mi ha voluta qui a parlare oggi. A febbraio 2024 io e Daniele Punterri, un altro ex membro del team Stefania, abbiamo sfidato vento e pioggia, tanta pioggia, e siamo andati in missione in territorio oceanico e precisamente a Lubecca e a Lüneburg, sulle tracce dei mercanti, in archivi, biblioteche, musei e municipi. Oggi io ho deciso di parlarvi brevemente di uno degli ambienti più importanti e interessanti del municipio di Lubecca, la sala delle udienze, dove si riunivano i componenti del Consiglio cittadino. Nel gennaio del 1758 il pittore Stefano Torelli, bolognese d'origine ma da anni residente a Dresda come uno dei pittori di corte di re Augusto III di Polonia, veniva contattato da uno dei capomastri del cantiere del municipio di Lubecca, che era stato in parte ricostruito nel 1754 ed era in attesa di essere adeguatamente decorato negli interni. In questa occasione all'artista viene richiesto di inviare un bozzetto, quindi una sorta di piccolo quadro di prova, per una tela di soggetto allegorico che doveva far parte di un ciclo di opere destinate a decorare le pareti della sala delle udienze della sede comunale. A maggio l'artista spediva il modelletto, che vedete qui, raffigurante l'allegoria della libertà al Consiglio, che aveva precedentemente rifiutato le prove di due artisti di Amburgo, quindi di due artisti tedeschi. Accetta invece quella di Torelli, che viene quindi ufficialmente incaricato di eseguire tutte e 10 le tele. La scelta di Torelli può facilmente essere spiegata per una questione di prestigio. Durante il XVIII secolo, infatti, le scuole pittoriche considerate più importanti a livello europeo erano senza ombra di dubbio quella italiana e quella francese. Il programma iconografico stabilito per il più importante ambiente di rappresentanza di Lubecca prevedeva una serie di allegorie di virtù fondamentali per il governo della città e di scene relative alle conseguenze positive di una buona amministrazione. Punto di partenza per l'esecuzione delle tele è l'iconologia di Cesare Ripa, un trattato pubblicato per la prima volta a Roma nel 1593 che forniva indicazioni per la rappresentazione visiva di concetti astratti attraverso figure umane, attributi simbolici e oggetti convenzionali, che si trovava sul comodino di davvero qualunque pittore o scultore italiano, ma che era molto diffuso anche in Germania grazie a diverse edizioni, come quelle pubblicate ad Amburgo nel 1659, a Francoforte nel 1670, ad Augsburg nel 1704 e a Norimberga nel 1734. Grazie a una serie di documenti, contratti e lettere conservati presso l'archivio comunale della città e pubblicati in un articolo di inizio Novecento, sappiamo che il pittore fu impegnato nell'impresa dal maggio del 1759 al settembre del 1761. Le opere di Torelli, come vedete, erano destinate a un ambiente caratterizzato dalla presenza di una raffinata decorazione a stucchi bianchi e verdi in stile rococò. La prima tela a venire portata a termine nel luglio del 1759 fu quella per la quale l'artista bolognese aveva inviato il bozzetto, e cioè la Libertà, che possiamo considerare proprio la personificazione di Lubecca, che faceva sì parte dell'impero, ma che sin dal 1226 conservava il suo stato di città libera. Torelli la raffigura come una giovane donna vestita di bianco con un manto rosso, i colori araldici della città, che stringe nella mano destra uno scettro, significante, secondo Ripa, l'autorità della libertà e l'imperio. Di fronte a lei due puttini tengono uno scudo argentato e un gioco rotto, simbolo di libertà, mentre alla sua destra è presente un soldato con un'asta sulla quale svetta una decorazione con l'aquila bicefala, quindi probabilmente un riferimento all'appartenenza di Lubecca all'impero. Interessante come uno dei puttini indichi con un dito il centro dello scudo, sul quale però non è scritto né rappresentato nulla. Nel bozzetto preparatorio, che vedete invece a destra, al centro dell'oggetto leggiamo chiaramente Libertà August, quindi Libertas Augusti, la stessa espressione che secondo Ripa doveva figurare sul cappello che l'allegoria della libertà avrebbe dovuto tenere nella mano destra. Non è nota la ragione per la quale nella redazione finale non sia presente la scritta. Non essendoci ridipinture evidenti, è possibile che a Torelli sia stato chiesto di non inserirla all'ultimo momento, a composizione già conclusa, e che quindi non sia stato possibile modificare la mano del putto che indica il centro vuoto dello scudo. Al centro della seconda tela vediamo una donna coronata di fiori che con la mano sinistra tiene una ciotola dorata con all'interno un melograno e con la destra tocca un fascio di spighe di grano tenuto da un puttino che vola accanto a lei. Completano la composizione altri due putti, uno con in mano un ramo di mirto e un altro posizionato ai piedi della figura principale, intento a reggere una cornucopia in forma di fiori colorati. Si tratta di un'interessante immagine che porta un doppio significato, quello dell'abbondanza, che Ripa descrive come una donna che indossa una veste verde con fregi d'oro. Il color verde e i fregi dell'oro del suo vestimento sono colori propri, essendo che il bel verdeggiare della campagna mostri fertile produzione e l'ingiallire la maturazione delle biade e dei frutti che fanno l'abbondanza, che porta sul capo una bella ghirlanda di vari fiori e che tiene una cornucopia e un fascio di spighe. E, oltre a quello dell'abbondanza, quello della concordia, data la presenza della ciotola con all'interno il melograno. La concordia doveva essere infatti una donna bella che mostri gravità, nella destra mano tendi una tazza nella quale vi sarà un pomo granato. La serie continua con le classiche raffigurazioni di due delle virtù cardinali, la temperanza con il morso, la palma e il leone, e della prudenza. Una donna che indossa un elmo circondato da una ghirlanda delle foglie del moro, che tiene una freccia intorno alla quale vi sarà rivolto un pesce detto remora, uno specchio, ed è accompagnata da un cervo, perché quanto le lunghe e disposte gambe l'incitano alla corsa, tanto lo ritarda il grave peso delle corna e il pericolo di impedirsi con esse fra le selve e gli serpi. Troviamo poi un'interessante raffigurazione interpretata come la segretezza. Un guerriero con in mano una chiave rivolto verso un putto e si porta il dito indice alla bocca in segno di silenzio. Vicino a loro, in primo piano, sta un cane con in bocca un osso. Michael Hunt, che ha pubblicato nel 2020 un volume sulla decorazione della sala, ipotizza che questa raffigurazione sia un diretto riferimento ai membri del Consiglio, che durante il XVIII secolo dovevano giurare di celare e nascondere quello che celare e nascondere devo. Nell'iconologia non esiste nessun riscontro preciso per quanto riguarda questa figura allegorica. La segretezza è descritta infatti come una donna vestita di nero che con la destra mano si ponga un anello sopra la bocca in atto di imprimerla e ai piedi d'un canto vi sia una ranocchia. È possibile però che l'immagine sia stata costruita prendendo caratteristiche e attributi da diverse personificazioni semanticamente legate al concetto di segretezza. Il gesto di portarsi l'indice alla bocca, infatti, viene associato da Ripa all'allegoria del silenzio, mentre il cane e la chiave a quello della fedeltà. Donna vestita di bianco, con la sinistra mano tiene una chiave e ha ai piedi un cane. La chiave è indizio di segretezza, che si deve tenere nelle cose appartenenti alla fedeltà dell'amicizia, il che ancora, per singolare istinto di natura, la fedeltà si significa per il cane. A Torelli viene poi chiesto di dipingere l'allegoria della previdenza, una giovane donna con un mantello giallo che tiene nella mano un compasso, perché per prevedere le cose si devono misurare le qualità, gli ordini, le disposizioni, i tempi e tutti gli accidenti col discorso di savio giudizio e di discreto pensiero. E ha vicino a sé uno scoiattolo, perché da figlio e vecchio è posto nella previdenza, dicendo che tra gli altri doni che tiene dalla natura, quando si vuole riposare dall'aria, ha la coda che gli serve per coprirsi contro l'ardore dei raggi del sole, servirebbe a noi oggi, e contro l'impeto dei venti e delle piogge, prevedendo per istinto naturale la mutazione del tempo. Secondo Ripa, la previdenza avrebbe dovuto avere anche due facce come Giano, elemento non tenuto in conto da Torelli, probabilmente perché avrebbe tolto un po' di piacevolezza alla raffigurazione di questa giovane donna. La parete ovest era completata da un'allegoria identificabile con la carità, come la carità, quindi una donna con a fianco un bambino e un turicolo, e dalle classiche raffigurazioni della pace, coronata d'ulivo, e della giustizia, con la spada e la bilancia, che si tengono per mano e che molto spesso vengono rappresentate insieme, come nella straordinaria tela di Alessandro Martyn, La giustizia e la pace uniscono l'Italia e la Germania attraverso il commercio, dipinta per la sala dell'udienza del Palazzo Mercantile di Bolzano e già citata da Stefania ieri mattina. Un governo capace di amministrare con rettitudine la giustizia, di garantire la pace e guidato da tutte le virtù positive precedentemente descritte, non può che avere conseguenze positive sulla comunità. E proprio agli effetti di questo buon governo, la fioritura delle arti e del commercio sono dedicati dipinti collocati sulla parete sud, ai lati della porta d'ingresso, che presentano anche dimensioni leggermente più grandi di quelli appena descritti. Due parole anche sulla porta, sulla porta linea che venne scolpita nel 1573 e che è l'unico elemento che rimane della decorazione precedente, la ristrutturazione dell'ambiente. La porta è inquadrata da una struttura classicheggiante con due fasci di semicolonne corinzie che reggono un timpano triangolare, sotto il quale corre un fregio dove leggiamo una scritta scritta che si riferisce alla funzione del Consiglio come tribunale. Sulle due ante riconosciamo le allegorie della giustizia e della carità, mentre nella lunetta si trova scolpito il giudizio di Salomone, una scena che ricorre spesso nella decorazione degli ambienti adibiti al tribunale. Ritornando alle nostre tele, a destra troviamo l'allegoria delle arti, con al centro la musa di Torelli, quindi la pittura, circondata da musica, poesia, architettura e scultura. Mentre a destra la raffigurazione del commercio, a sottolineare la vocazione mercantile della città. Interessante come Torelli in quest'ultimo caso non si rifaccia in nessun modo al manuale di Ripa, nel quale il commercio è indicato come un uomo con una doppia macina, accompagnato da una cicogna e da un cervo, ma decida, molto probabilmente su richiesta dei committenti, di dipingere una composizione che si legasse direttamente alle storie e alla vita della città, quindi una scena di commercio portuale, con in primo piano due personaggi intenti a caricare o scaricare pacchi di merce. In bella vista il caduceo, simbolo di Hermes, il dio protettore dei commerci, e a sinistra dei mercanti con dei copricapi orientali. E visto che la lettura dell'iconologia di Ripa ci ha accompagnato nella descrizione e interpretazione di questo importante ciclo pittorico, concluderei il mio breve intervento proprio con la descrizione, la romantica descrizione che il trattatista fa del commercio. Un uomo che con dito indice della destra mano accenni a una macina doppia che gli sta accanto. Con la sinistra mano tenga una cicogna ed ai piedi un cervo. Si dipinge in questa guisa perché la macina è simbolo delle azioni e commerci della vita umana, poiché le macine sono sempre due e una ha bisogno dell'altra, e sole mai non possono fare l'opera di macinare. Così anche un uomo per se stesso non può ogni cosa, e le amicizie nostre si chiamano necessitudini, perché ad ognuno è necessario avere qualche amico, col quale poter conferire i suoi disegni, scambiarsi benefici, l'un l'altro sollevarsi e aiutarsi, come fanno le cicogne, le quali, perché sono di collo alto, a lungo andare si straccano nel volare, né possono sostenere la testa, sicché una appoggia il collo dietro all'altra e la guida quando è stracca. Così dice Plinio, e Isidoro riferisce un simile costume dei cervi, i quali, per il peso delle corna, in breve tempo si straccano, né possono reggere la testa quando nuotano per qualche gran fiume, e perciò uno appoggia il capo sopra la groppa dell'altro, ed il primo, quando è stracco, passa dietro, sicché in tal maniera questi animali si danno l'un l'altro aiuto. Il gran maestro di questo mondo, molto saggiamente, ha fatto che non ha dato ogni cosa ad un luogo, però che ha voluto che tutta questa università si corrisponda con proporzione, che abbia bisogno dell'opera dell'altro, e per tal bisogno una nazione abbia bisogno di trattare e accompagnarsi con l'altra, onde ne è derivata la permutazione del vendere e del comprare, e si è fatto tra tutti il commercio della vita umana. Vi ringrazio.
So thank you also to Chiara and Giudice also to care for this brilliant paper and for having been in the Times. So if Stefania agrees, I'll open the discussion. We'll have 10 minutes, more or less.
Yeah.
Because we have
okay, 10 more or less.
More or less.
I would like to finish for 5:30 altogether, if it's possible. I mean,
5:30, our session, no, the session of Professor Bruno.
And a brief coffee break in the bar, if you want.
Fine, so there is the first question.
Yes, so thank you to all three, because I thoroughly enjoyed your talks, of course. They were all trained to be self-fashioning.
This is what they wanted, this is how they wanted to be represented themselves, yes. Indeed.
Thank you. The other question was for Chiara. Giudice, thank you for your talk, and I wanted to ask, do we know in detail what was in the Ancien style before Belem intervention, except for the beautiful portal intagliato that you showed?
No.
We don't know.
No. Sappiamo in percento che c'erano delle altre decorazioni lignee, ma non sappiamo cosa.
Okay, thank you.
Who was next? Professor De Cock and Professor Brunori.
I can bring it.
Thank you to three of you for really very interesting papers, each of them very short questions really for each of you. First for George, I was wondering, how we can explain that in Flanders there was relatively little iconographic representation of let's say, commerce and finance, considering that in Brabant, and what there was, we have Belem Fernández, one of the famous paintings of money changers. How come that, in Flanders they didn't feel like they had to compete, for example, with Brabant, or also try to imitate and emulate Brabant? This general question still, when you were presenting, came to my mind. A question for Anna. It's also a very interesting presentation. If I saw correctly, the foundation of most, or at least a very big number of these consulates in Latin American countries took place like around 1785, and then also so a couple of years before the French Revolution, and also just afterwards.
Yes.
I was wondering if there was a particular reason for that. What happened at that time in the Spanish colonies that made these consulates so necessary at this moment? And then for General Giudice, regarding this last statement, I may have been a little bit falling asleep because of the hot weather. But so this last citation, could you just recall where exactly it comes from? Because it made me think of like a topos that you find in the moral theological literature, already in the 13th century, and it never stops in the Dominican literature, especially. You always hear this idea, it's a way of justifying from a theological point of view commerce. And so I was wondering what the relationship is between this citation, which apparently is related to your story on Lubecca, and this larger tradition.
Sì, la citazione deriva proprio dalla definizione di commercio che c'è nell'iconologia di Cesare Ripa, quindi sì, stampata per la prima volta nel 1593. Quindi l'iconologia recuperava diciamo degli elementi dalla storia antica, dall'arte antica, e quindi alcuni topos ovviamente insomma, sono molto più antichi del 1593.
Thank you.
Professor Brunori.
Thank you very much.
Lynn, will you be so kind to pass the mic to Professor Brunori? Thank you. Sorry. I thought that I could collect all the questions and then, but perhaps better the answers first and then the final question. Sorry, I thought to collect all the questions together, but it's better to give the possibility to the interview to answer, please. So, Anna, Professor Martyn.
It's a very fast answer, a short answer, because it responded to a political initiative to stimulate commerce, because it was a period of commercial decadence, actually. Mm-hmm. So through these institutions, they wanted to support and attract more commercial foreigners, basically, but it didn't work. Exactly.
The question on Brabant and Flanders, in art history, it's very clear that the most important center for art in the 15th century is Bruges and Gent together, yes, and then it moves to Antwerp in the 16th century. We still have in Bruges a few important painters, but nothing very special anymore. But then you have Antwerp with Rubens, Jordaens, Van Dyck, the Baroque school, and the Counter-Reformation invested a lot of money, especially Albert and Isabel, for instance, also for churches and convents in Flanders, but it were most of all Brabant painters who came over to Flanders to do it. It might have to do also, I think, with the fact that government itself was had moved to Brussels So you had Antwerp as a commercial heart and artistic heart, Brussels as the political center, so Ghent, literally the castle of the count is falling to ruins, literally. So there's not much investment in art, unfortunately. There's a little revival at the end of the 18th century in Ghent, with especially that Familie van der Rijschoot, of which you saw one painting, and they made the most decorations of the beautiful houses that are now luckily classified monuments, like Dane Steenhuizen or Hotel Faligan in Ghent, and that's all second part of the 18th century. That a revival at that moment, but the 16th, 17th is a bad period for Flanders.
I have one last.
There was Professor Roy first. Sorry, because I haven't.
Sorry. Where's the
Please,
microphone?
Louisa. Yes, sorry.
Thank you very much. I have just one question for Anna. You have shown very well that the merchants building in Seville was wanted and built by the king, and in the contrary, in Valencia it was wanted and built by Sisi. My question is, does this circumstance had an effect on the way in which the consulado was organized, the institutional structure, and also, more important, on the way to administering justice?
Yes, absolutely. The fact that both the Consulate of Seville and the Consulate of the See of Valencia were royal institutions, it made, it linked commercial jurisdictional directly to civil law. And they were totally interdependent, and consuls relied on the advice of legal experts, but not only, they actually depended sometimes in complicated cases of their advice. And in some cases, mainly in Seville, I have found that lawyers alone settle disputes in the absence of consuls. So this on the one side, but in the other side, on the other hand, also the process of the appeal process was followed the model of the civil law. So they were totally connected, and progressively, mainly from the second half of the 16th century onwards, we see technification of the consular jurisdiction that tended to follow the forms and the formalities of the ordinary jurisdiction.
I have a little question for Professor Martyn, and if I may, sorry, was there anybody else?
Me? But
oh, sorry.
I would like to say also something about the organization, so go on.
Fine. It is very quick. I was fascinated by the procedural bets, and I wanted to ask you when they start, because we have a lot of bats in late Middle Ages that usually are here or here, and that are symbol of greed, usually.
Yeah.
Of the, great, exactly. And very similar, actually, to your procedural bats. And so when do they start? When do you have the first evidences of them in the...
There are already, there's evidence, drawings of procedural backs already in manuscripts of the late Middle Ages. So it's I think it's there from the very start of the Roman
canonical. And here, or also here?
No, how you wear it, that's something else, but mostly they hold it in their hand, because it is nothing you wear like a bag with your money or anything. You don't do kilometers walking with that bag. It's a bag in which the documents of the process are preserved. There's the famous painting of Peter Bruegel the Younger, where you have the lawyer's office with many bags pending, referring to pending cases and bags in the ground of ended cases.
Pending bags, pending cases. Very interesting.
And in the iconography, for instance, of Saint Eve, in St. Ethan, the patron saint of the lawyers also, you very often see him also with that procedural bag in his hand.
Okay.
And it's very similar to what is called the book bag. And a book bag is a book like this, but the leather goes on and you can hold the leather like that so that you can walk around with your book.
I see.
Yes, and then you don't have what they call the etiquette.
Okay.
While the procedural bag has the etiquette, and that's the court clerk who writes on, or the proctor, actually the proctor who writes on it. This is the bag of that party in that case.
Very interesting. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I just wanted to make a comment, a little one, on the last part of the Chiara's speech, because it was surprising to me to see that there is this reference to friendship a lot, and the word amicizia, friendship, is very much present in also in the visa exchange of the early modern period. For example, in Spain, I'm sure I talked about it at least with Caro Spedita, mio caro amico, so this order of payment or promise, depending on the cases. And also the movie that we are going to watch this evening has this at the center. So the central topic, in a certain sense, is amicizia. So friendship today, with reference to this play by Capo Goldoni, and you can see everything. So, but I liked it very much. This also references to animals; they have to support each other in a certain sense. And after this, I have a proposal for you all. I know it's super hot. We are all tired, but. As there is no real coffee break, because we should go to the bar now, if you resist, we could do the last two papers and then go and have a shower later before the projection. Yeah? Okay? For the speakers of the next session, water is arriving. Okay? So I know. So thank you very much. It was very our light in the dark when it comes to iconography justice in Northern Europe. Absolutely.